These testimonies and confessions are wonderful. That shows me that you're dead in earnest, and God knows you're dead in earnest. And there's a lot of things in my mind this evening. For those of you who are trying your best to walk with the Lord, let me first of all say that all you can do at this altar is just come and yield to Him. Let Him remove all the stubbornness from your heart and everything that holds you back, but don't expect Him to show you the future. The devil's going to try to scare you about the future. He's going to tell you you can't live it, and you can't on your own. And I'd like to share a little make-believe story I heard somewhere because it helped me. I tell my students, if I find something that helps me and I share with you, it might help you. Now, if I found something that didn't do a thing for me, why would I tell it didn't help me? Why would it help you? So I like to share things that have helped me. Somewhere there was a clockmaker who made clocks. And he had a little showroom out in the front of this old house, and he would make a clock, weeks and weeks of work. Finally, he'd take it out and set it up on the shelf. He'd wind it up, and he'd adjust the pendulum, and he'd get that thing going, and it would start tick-tock, tick-tock. He made a little clock one day and set it up there and started the pendulum going. And the clock on the one side leaned over and said, "Just think, little clock, in the next year you've got to click 3,797 times. And the little clock said, "I can never do that," and just quit. Well, the shopkeeper came out after a while, noticed his new clock had stopped. He made a few adjustments, got the pendulum going again, and he starts tick-tock, tick-tock. And the clock on the other side leaned over and said, "Just think, little clock, all you've got to do is tick once every second." And the little talk said, "I can do that." And I thought, the devil would tell you what all you're going to have to do in the next year or the next month and tells you can never do it. And you'll find yourself half agreeing with him. But I'd like to say to myself, I look in the mirror and say, look, can I serve the Lord for the next minute? Can I live above sin for the next minute? So I believe I can. And then I say, well, if I can do it for a minute, can I do it for 5 minutes? No sins, walking in all the light? Well, I believe I can. If I can do it for 5, I can do it for 15. If I can do it for 15, I can do it for an hour. Sometimes you just have to take your mountain you have to climb and break it down to a manageable increment and think in little small steps each day, every moment of the day. So a lot of times, the old timer said you live for him moment by moment, and I know now what they meant by that. You don't live for him year by year. Those minutes will add up to a year. But don't let Satan scare you off and say, well, you can't do it. Think about all you have to do in the next week. Well, forget the next week. Break it down to a day or an hour or a minute if you have to. And God will help you. God's got victory. We were talking 4 preachers today, and I was telling them I think the altar sometimes can be a plus or can be a minus. Sometimes I think we expect too much out of the altar. This altar is just a piece of wood up here. There's nothing magical about it. This is simply where we come and surrender ourselves to God, yield ourselves to God. God will take you so far, the Holy Spirit will show you how far you can go, and most of us know when we've reached that point. Now, Andrew, I really appreciate what you've shared tonight. Wesley would say you're in the pathway of duty, and the blood covers you at this point. You're unsatisfied, and that's great. I'm glad you're unsatisfied, but you're in the way of duty. You just keep right on going. And God will show you day by day those areas and it'll probably end up coming down to one tap root. That's the whole problem. And we'll start at the outer edges of the branch, and we'll work our way. We'll get to the trunk of the problem, and he'll show you how to deal with that. And one day, he's going to show you there's nothing left of the old stump. And he'll witness to you, might be singing a song on Sunday morning or something, and God will say, Andrew, that's what I did for you. That'll be your witness. I love to talk to the old saints. I was at a meeting just a couple weeks ago, and I was sharing with them. Everyone knew the fellow I was talking about. He used to lead the midnight prayers at Stoneboro Camp for years. One of the godliest men I ever knew. Converted old drinking Roman Catholic. Pastored a church for 40 years, and he's in heaven now. And I went to him one night in the tabernacle at Stoneboro, and I said, tell me, how was it the night you prayed through, the night you got sanctified? I said, was it hilarious? Did you feel like shouting and running? No, he said, really? He said, I just prayed until I knew I was done doing business with God. God assured me everything was okay. My heart was clear. He said, I just back up and sat down on the front pew and watched the rest of them pray through. You never had any great hilarity? Well, no, he said, I really didn't. And for 40 years, he walked with God, never missed a step. We're sort of trained to expect some high emotional something or other here at the altar. You just come to the altar and you pray, and as we learned the other night, you can pray anywhere, really. I could tell you about my electrician friend in the second church I pastored. He told God, now here's what I did, and it sounds like you've done this. Being in education, I like to think in terms of objectives and visions and so forth. And so usually the last Sunday night before the revival would begin, I would throw the church open for people to get up and declare what they wanted God to do for them during the revival. It sounds like you must have done something like that here. Terry was a new convert. He was saved. God really saved him. His wife wasn't yet. He came to camp meeting all excited. She came, still had her wedding ring on. He talked her into taking it off and hiding it during camp meeting. She wasn't even saved yet. And he's just plowing ahead as fast as he can. And he still had some question marks, so we had a fall revival. Terry got up and he said, people, he said, here's what I want before this revival ends. I want to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that I'm really all that I think I am spiritually. I've got to know where I am. And I thought, well, that sounds good, but I was a little bit scared because you don't want to put time limits on God. Now, he said it's got to be by Sunday night. By the end of the revival, he has to know. So he sort of set some boundaries for this, and you don't want to do that with God. Well, the evangelist came, and we started in. Sure enough, every altar call, Terry was the first one to the altar. Everybody loved him. He's just one of those guys, you just couldn't help but love him. They're all rooting for him. He was the first one to the altar and the last one to leave every night. So Tuesday night, I thought, well, maybe tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, nothing. Finally, we got down till Sunday night, and I panicked because I knew Terry well enough that I knew how this was going to end up. Sure enough, we're down to the last service. Terry came to the altar. He prayed and he prayed and he prayed, but I could tell he wasn't satisfied. We probably prayed maybe an hour and a half, and finally we ended. And Terry left, went out and got in his pickup truck and drove home. And kind of with a heavy heart, although we'd had a lot of victories, I really was focused on Terry that night. We went over to the parsonage. Wife had made some sort of a little treat meal, some kind, a snack. Just as we pulled up to the table, the phone rang, and it was Terry on the phone. Oh, he was all excited. Pastor, he said, Pastor, let me tell you what happened. He said, it's about 3 miles out to Mapleton. And he said, you know where you cross that old railroad track one time and you go about a mile and you cross the track again? He said, halfway between those two tracks on the way home, he said, something happened. He said, like God took a can opener and opened the roof of my pickup truck and shined a big sunshine in there. And he said, things just lit up like a noonday sun. He said, I pulled over. He said, I kicked that thing in neutral and sat there and bawled and laughed and cried. And God assured me that the work was done. And from that day to this, I don't think Terry's ever looked back one time. See, he didn't get it at the altar. He'd made his covenant. He'd made his peace with God. God will witness, however, whenever he knows it's time to witness, God will. In the meantime, you just keep walking. Just stay faithful. Break it down to a minute or an hour, however time is manageable for you, and you can walk with God. If I had a little more time, I'd talk to you about Enoch this evening, but I'm not going to keep you. Enoch is the man who walked himself with God. I love to talk about Enoch, how he walked himself with God. It's an excellent lesson on self-discipline. Maybe sometime I'll share that with you. You just have to put the collar on your own neck and snap on the leash and say, come on, old boy, I'm going to do what you got to do. And you can walk yourself with God.